Okay, this is part 2 of our Zoho Creator session. And as you know, last time we had the session, we did an expense management application. And today we are going to continue with that application. And we're going to add some custom functions to it and some custom automations to it. So let's get into the application from where we left off. Just a small recap from the last session. We created an employees form that allows us to add employees to our system, and we have a few employees in the system. And then we added an expense submission form, and this expense submission form allows us to add, allows the employees to add an expense, and they can submit that. And then we created an approvals form, which then just generates the approvals that need to be approved by the various approvers or managers that will be in charge of a particular employee. So that's essentially what we had done last time using some of the fields. Let me just open one of the forms just as a small recap of what that part looked like. Edit this application. So this was the form interface where we were creating our forms. We were using the fields on the left here to create the employee name, employee ID, employee email, department, designation, and manager. So that is amongst what we were doing in the last session. So today we're going to take it a step further and add some custom functions that will allow us to perform particular actions in our system. So with regards to that, the first thing we're actually going to go through is the employees table. So we created the employees table last time, and then we had to add a designation field. So with regards to this designation field, let me just open a new tab where we have the application open. We added this designation field. So based on the designation of the employee, if the employee is a manager, it stops at that. But if the employee is an operations person, this will then add a field where you have to select who the manager of that particular employee will be based on the people in the system. So that's something we added as well. So today we're going to start by adding a current submission date for our expense submissions. That is something that we believe people would be interested in knowing how to do. So with regards to that, we go to our expense submission form and we click edit this application. And then we'll give it a minute to open up. Click open form builder. So when we get here, what we want to do is add a current submission date. Basically a date that will be captured in terms of when this submission was actually added to the system. So what we'll do is we'll drag a date field and we'll put it there. And then in the settings of the date field, we will name this submission date. And then once we do that, the field link name will automatically update. And then the initial value that we want in this field is the Zoho current date. So you click this little icon on the right here, and then it gives you variables that you can use. And then we select Zoho current date. And then we don't actually need this field to be visible to an employee who would be entering the information. We just need that field to actually capture the submission date. So what you then do is go to visibility and you select the show field to, and then you select admin only. And then once you do that, that will be done for that particular field. So now whenever something is submitted, it actually adds the current date. As you can see, if we open the form, if we actually go to the application, access this application, it inserts the current date in that particular field automatically. So at least that way we know when the submission was done. And the next thing we're going to look at is we are going to create a function that populates. Let me actually show you what we want to adjust. Let me go to the expense submission form. So when we are in this form, if you select an employee, right right now, as the system is currently, you then have to select the department manually, and then you then have to select the approver manually. But the thing is, this is information that is already in the system under the employee. So if I actually go to the list of employees in the system, you'll see that all employees, you'll see that this information is already there under that employee, the department, and who the manager is. That is already there. So we want to take away the hassle of someone having to enter that information again as they are actually submitting a new expense submission. We want it to just auto-populate those fields. So we are actually going to do that using a custom function today. So the first thing we do is we click Edit this application, and then we go to Workflow. So under Workflows, we will then have to go to New Workflow, and then this is the screen that pops up. So the first thing is we are creating this workflow for the expense submission form. So you have to make sure that you have this specific form that you're working on already selected. And then the next thing is we select run when the record is created or edited. And then here we select the trigger that we need to use for that particular form. So in this case, we want the department and approver name to be auto-populated when the employee name has been selected. So we are going to use user input of a field. That is the one we'll use. And then once that is done, we then select the particular field that we want to use for that form, which is employee name. And then we'll name this form workflow auto-populate employee information. So once that is done, we then click Create Flow, and then this is the screen that comes up. So now you have to create Add New Action. So when you select Add New Action, this screen pops up. This is where you are then able to enter your custom script, the one that we'll actually use in the particular form for you to perform the particular actions. So the first thing we want to happen in our script is we want to be able to get the employee's particular details, get them into the script so that we can then use those details to auto-populate the fields. So the first thing we do is we create a variable that will actually capture the relevant information that will be coming in of that particular employee. And then when we do that, we now have to tell the script where we are actually getting this particular information. So in this instance, this information is coming from, actually, let me show you the refer fields first. So there are fields on the right under this option that says refer fields. So these fields will give you options in terms of what the naming variables you can use for the particular fields that you'd like to be pointing to or from. So in this case, if we go to employees, that is the form that we are actually trying to work with. So that's where we're trying to get our information. So the variable name for that will be employees. And then what we are trying to ensure is that when the field is created, when we get the employees details, we need to make sure that the ID of the employee in the employees table is the same as the ID that is in the drop-down of the employee name on our expenses page. So those are the two variables that will be compared in order to know which particular employee's details will be pulled through. So with that in mind, what we'll then do is we add a square bracket there, and then ID, and this ID is the one that will be pointing to the ID of the particular employee in the employee's form. And then equal to input dot employee name. So this particular line, we have to terminate that. So this particular line says that the ID in employees field should be matching the ID that is in the employee name input. So once those two match, that's when it's able to then pull that particular employee's details. And then the next thing we want to do in order to do this is we create an if statement. And in this if statement, what we want to ensure is that our employee details are not empty before we actually try to utilize the information in that employee's details. So what we then do is we go employee details. You can type this out, or if the option you want is already available, you can easily just select the particular variable that you're looking for from the drop-down that pops up. So you can select employee details, and then we do not actually, we need to add dot count. So what this does, it makes sure that it counts the number of entities or employee, it makes sure that the employee details is not empty, and it counts the number of entities in that particular employee details map. So we want this to ensure that it's greater than 0. So this makes sure that the employee details is actually not empty. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to then adjust the input fields with the information that's already coming from the employee's details. So the first field we'll start with is the department field. So we go input, and then we can then go to the expense submission, and then we can then just click on department. It then puts that department option there for us. And then we can go equal. And then, so basically what we're inputting in that field is coming from employee details. And in employee details, we're getting the department again. Okay, so that's the first field that we're populating. So something that you can do as you're going along, just to make sure you don't have errors, is you can save as you're going along. If there's an error, for instance, let me show you. Let me just remove that semicolon, and then I try to save. It pops up an error that tells you that there's something wrong with your current code, and you have to actually look into what is actually wrong with it. But in this case, if we just add the semicolon that we had removed, and you click update, it goes away to show that everything is fine with the current code that we have. So the next field that we want is the approver field. We go input, and there is approver there. And then we want to assign the approver's information, the manager's information. So we say employee details dot manager, because the name of the manager or the ID of the manager is the one that we want to assign to the approver field. And then we update this. And our function to auto-populate those two fields is done as it is. So just a recap, on this line, we are getting the users, the employee details. And once the employee details are in the function, we then take the employee department and the employee manager, and we assign the department to the department field in the expenses form, and then we assign the manager to the approver field in the expenses form. So once that is done, we can close this, click done, and then we access this application again. And then once we do that, we can go to expense submission, and we can then click the drop down there, and then we can select one of the employees. And then once we do that, as you can see, department, finance, approver, Tawanda. So that information is being pulled through from the employee's information down to the expense submission form. So the employee would not have to fill this information in manually. And then that would be it with regards to that particular function. And then the next thing we'll be doing today is we will have an alert box to pop up if, in this case, let's say your organization has got a limit in terms of how much they allow a person to actually use as an expense and how much they're allowed to submit as an expense. So for instance, if we go to this amount, right now, if we enter 1 million, essentially it doesn't actually pick up on anything that there's anything wrong. it allows the user to actually enter an expense of 1 million, but we do not want that. So the next thing we're actually going to do is we're going to create a custom function that has an alert box that pops up to tell the user that no, your expense should always be below a specified amount. Okay, so the next thing we do is we go edit this application again. And then we go workflows, and then we can say expense submission, and then we can say new workflow for that. Okay, so now what happens is that we're still using the expense submission form, so we don't have to change that. And then we use created or edited. And then in this particular trigger, we are still using user input of a field, because in this case we are making sure that the amount is below a specified figure once the input is entered by the user. So we select that one. And then the field we're looking at is amount. And then we can just name it the maximum expense amount. So create that. Okay, so now the next thing we do is we go to add new function and we start writing our code again. So in this particular script, the first thing we want to do is create a variable that we can assign the maximum amount we allow an expense to be. So the first thing we do is we create a variable. So mind you, this name can be anything you want. In this case, we choose to name it maximum expense amount. But with regards to scripting and coding, you cannot have spaces in the name of a variable. And it's recommended to use this camel structure in terms of naming your variables, so that you're able to then see, for instance, if you put it like this, maximum expense amount, it's harder to read at first glance. But then if you capitalize the first letters of the other words, you're then able to read it as you're going along. So in this case, we're going to put our maximum amount at, let's say, 2,000. And then the next thing we want to do is make sure that a number or an amount has actually been entered in the amount input field, and to make sure that it's not actually empty, or to make sure that it's actually above that particular amount. So again, we're going to use an if statement. With regards to the if statement, you can type out the whole structure, or it will actually suggest it for you, and then you just select the if statement that you want to use. So the next thing we do is we enter the field of our input variable. In this case, it's input.amount. And then we just have to make sure it's actually greater than the maximum expense amount, to make sure that it has actually exceeded that particular amount. So we then say maximum expense amount. Okay, that's our if statement. So now what we're going to do is have an alert box that pops up, actually giving us the notification that this amount has exceeded the allowed amount. So we now go alert. So when you put this word alert, the system already knows that it's already using an alert box, as that is already a preset function in the system. Now we say alert, and then we put the message that we want to put. Expense amount cannot exceed R. So the reason we're just ending at that we're just ending at the R is because what we're going to do is we're going to take this variable, and that's the one we're going to use for the amount we're going to put at the end there. So everything in the double inverted commas is just text. It's not actually going to be counted as the variable. Variables cannot be in double inverted commas. They have to be outside of that. So what you then do to add this, you then go plus maximum expense amount. And this will then make sure that this amount is then put there as the message when the alert box pops up. So essentially, that's the whole function we can use right now. And this will then make sure that the message pops up when the amount has exceeded 2,000. So now we can save this, and then we can close it. Done. Access this application, and then we can go to expense submission form. So now what happens is when we enter an amount that's greater than 2,000, it then says, sorry, let me just rephrase that. I was not supposed to press enter. Reload. Okay, so we enter 2.3. And then after it loads, it then brings up the message, expense amount cannot exceed 2,000. And once we actually go below 2,000, like maybe 1.9, and then we do that, it has no issues with that amount. So that is how you'd create a custom function to make sure a certain field, if it's an amount field or just a number field, to make sure that it doesn't go exceed a certain number. And yeah, that's the function you can use. The next thing we would like to do is create an email that is sent to the approver when a submission has been done with regards to the expense submission. So just a reminder, when you select the name of an employee name, it then assigns an approver here. And this approver is where you would like to actually see, that's the approver that's supposed to actually get the email when the submission is done. And that's the approver that actually approves the email. So in order to do that, we will go back to edit this application. Okay, so, and then we go workflow again. And then this is going to be on expense submission again. So under expense submission, what we'll then do is create a new workflow. This time we're only using the created because we want this email to be sent the first time the submission has been created. So with that in mind, what we then do is we select the trigger and we select after form submission, and then we select this successful form submission. That's the trigger that we're going to actually use. And then the name of our workflow is going to be send approver email. Create. Before I go to the add new action, there are some other settings here on the right, which here you can actually change some of the information you had previously set. So depending on the type of workflow you've selected and the type of automation you're trying to do, you can edit the settings of that particular workflow automation here on the right, if there's anything you'd want to change. Okay, so now we can go add new action, and we're going to select deluge script again. Okay, and with regards to that, we will then start scripting our code. So the first thing we want to do in this particular code is get the employees' details with regards to the approver email. So what we're going to do is create an approver email variable, and then we get the information we're about to get is coming from the employees table, or the employees that are actually entered into the system. And then, so now with regards to the employees table, the reason we're looking at the employees table is because the person who's an approver is the manager and they're already in the employees table. So we want to get the particular email address of that employee in the system. So now, square bracket there, the ID of the employee is equal to the input approver field. So this essentially means whoever is in our input approval field is the one we're using the ID to get the information from the employees table. So they have to match in order to pull that information through. And then what we can then do is, if you want to get the employee email address, which is a variable inside the employee's details, you just go dot employee email. So essentially what this line does is it pulls the employee email from the employee's information, and in this case it assigns it to our approver email. That's the field that we're looking for. So essentially, whenever we use the variable approval email, it is the email address of the manager who is going to approve. So that's the first thing we got. And the next thing we get is we enter is the email subject. So in this case, the email subject that we want to assign to the email is equal to new expense report submitted. Okay, so that's going to be the subject of our email. Going on to the next line. Email message. So we're going to then structure the email message that we actually want to be sent out. So in this case, what we then do is we go email message, email message is equal to. So the first part we want to do is create the part that says dear, and it's going to put the employee name. In this case, it's going to be the name of the approver. The regular structure of an email, dear, in this case, it may be Tamuka or whatever. So the name is the one that we want to put there. So in order for the name to be dynamically populated based on who the approver is, this is how we're going to structure it in our code. So we go dear, and then once we do that, we go dear space. And then because now what we want to enter is code that would dynamically populate the name of the approver, this is how we then structure that. We go plus employees, square bracket, ID is the same as the input dot approver. So in this case, we are getting the employee name. Mind you, just a reminder, if in case you had forgotten, the refer fields is where we are getting this information in terms of the variable names. So in this case, employee name is actually coming from employees, employee name. The only thing is that if we're actually not, let me just show you the spot. If we're actually not supposed to determine who the employee is, we would just go employee dot employee name, and then that would just get that information. But in this case, because we are trying to make sure that the approver name that we're getting is the one of the approver selected in the input field, that is why we have this particular part in the code, where it then looks at the ID of the employee in the employee table, and then it looks at the input variable entered in the form, matches them up, and then that's when it selects dot employee name. And that's how it pulls the name of the particular approver who is actually going to approve that. And then what we then do is go plus. And then now, because we're entering string text, ordinary text that's not part of the code, we now go back to our opening double inverted commas, and then we go comma. So /n in basic HTML just represents next line or enter. So whenever we put /n, it's essentially telling the email viewer which will be looking at the email from an HTML perspective, that go to the next line before you add whatever is at the bottom. So in this case, we're going to double enter. So we're going to put /n twice. And then we say plus. And then now we go to the next line where we are writing a new expense report has been submitted by new expense report has been submitted by space. So the same thing we did on the line above in terms of getting the approver name, we're going to do the same thing in terms of getting the employee's name of the employee that actually submitted the expense. So we go plus employees square bracket ID is equal to. So essentially in scripting or coding, one equal sign, you are assigning what's on the right to what's in the left. But when you put a double equal sign, you are comparing the two variables, or you're telling the system that these two variables should match. So by putting the double equal sign like that, we're telling the system that this ID and the input and approver should match. That is essentially what we're telling it. But if you just put one, you're essentially assigning what's in this input approver into ID, which is what we don't want. We want to compare the two. So double equal sign, input dot employee name, and then dot employee name again. Okay. So essentially, this is what's going to bring up the employee name in our code. And then plus, full stop, and then we put, it's actually \n. My apologies, it's \. I think, someone can correct me, I think it's \n. And then now we're going to the next line, plus. And then we go, please review and approve the report. And then again, we go \n, and then we close that string. And then now we go to the next line. The reason we're actually structuring it like this is for our own consumption when we're looking at it. Otherwise, if you're just going to put all this in a straight line, the script would not notice the difference. We are structuring it like this so that we are then able to look at it and remember, okay, this is what we were doing here. So it's for our own consumption to be able to then edit the code. Then we go another string, expense, details, plus. And then now we want to add the amount. Amount plus. So what we're doing now is getting the amount from the input amount field. So whenever we use the word input, we're referring to the form that's actually being worked on at that particular instance. So it knows that, okay, I'm looking at the field amount in this particular form, and that's the number or variable that I'm actually putting in that particular space. So input amount essentially just gets the information we want from the form in terms of the amount and puts it there. And then plus now we go to the next line. And then we say best regards. Plus, and then we sign it off. Expense management system. And that is the email that will actually be sent out. That's the email message. The next thing we do is we're actually going to create a function that will actually send the particular email. So what we do to send the email, we go send mail, and then that comes up. So these are the particular variables that are needed when you actually want to send the email. So the from, and then the to, and then subject, and then message. So in this instance, for the from email, we're going to use Zoho.admin user ID. So in this case, we're just telling the system that we're using the Zoho admin user ID as the email address. So that means this particular Zoho Creator account, whatever email address is in that system, that's the one it's going to use. And then two, we're going to use the approver email we got in the first line here. So that's the one we're going to use there, approver email. And then subject, we're going to use the email subject here, email subject. And then with regards to the message, we're going to use the email message here. Don't see email message there. Let me just type it out. Email message. Okay, I think that should do it. And then I need to add the semicolon in there. So let me try and save that. Brilliant, no issues reported. So now what we're going to do is test that out. So we close this, go done. Okay, so essentially something that I need to point out is that, sorry, let me actually just go back to the function quickly. With regards to this email that says from, in order to actually use some other email address, it has to be a verified email address in the system so that it can be sent from that particular email address. And then let me just go and test this out. Okay, so now what I do is I go access this application. And then we go expense submissions, expense submission. So in this case, we're going to use the employee Susan. So Susan, the department is automatically pulled in. And then what happens is that now we have to select the date of the expense. So maybe on the 6th. On the 6th, we bought some food worth 1,900 Rand. Then we can assign a picture if we want to, a picture receipt. Just going to add any picture there. So that's the receipt that we've assigned to that. And then now the approver is my name. So now we can submit this, submit. Beautiful. And then now I have to wait for the email to actually pop up on my side. Let me just stop sharing for a second, and then I'll get the email back to you just now. Okay. And then now I'll share my screen again. Okay, so this is the email that was sent. It's not the prettiest of emails, but you can always customize it with HTML as you go along in terms of a specific layout that you'd want to actually have. So this is the email that was sent from the account. And in this case, it was a demo account, so it had to use that particular email. And as you can see, the email came through. Okay, so that's about it with regards to our custom scripting. I don't know if there's anyone who has any particular questions that they would like to ask. You can always ask a question and I can answer that for you to the best of my abilities, of course. Everyone's good. I hope that means everyone understood what I was talking about. Yeah, that's about it. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we can actually end our webinar here. That is how you use some of the entry-level custom functions with regards to Zoho Creator. You can get more complicated because with Zoho Creator, you can end up using your JavaScript, your Java. You can integrate it into your applications to perform certain functions or to actually have third-party entities perform certain functions in Zoho Creator. But in terms of basic custom scripts using Deluge, those are some of the examples that you can use, and they will be beneficial in terms of making your system more user-friendly and easier to use, and that would be helpful. So I think we can end our webinar here today and see you in the next one. Thank you very much for joining.